Powered by Righteous Media.
Welcome to Independent Americans. Welcome to episode 376. I'm your host, Paul Rieckhoff. It is Tuesday, November 18th. I am coming to you from New York City, USA. And our guest today is Tom Bowman, legendary NPR reporter. He'll be coming up next. But before we get to that awesomeness, it's only Tuesday, but the news keeps on coming. Big news, the House will vote as early as today on a bill to release the files relating to Jeffrey Epstein. Trump has changed course and said he's okay with it. The UN Security Council, meanwhile, approved Trump's peace deal for Gaza. It's a 20-point plan that requires Hamas to give up its weapons and create a board of peace appointed by and headed by Trump. That'll be interesting. The Starbucks workers are still on strike. You may see that in your area. In national security news, a Tennessee judge temporarily blocked National Guard deployments in Memphis, Tennessee. The judge says the case, quote, raises important questions concerning the use of the state's military forces for domestic law enforcement purposes. Meanwhile, Trump has started to pull some troops back from Portland and other cities so they won't be deployed cleaning up parks over Thanksgiving and Christmas. And the American military is back to blasting boats. They hit another one. And Trump has also reversed course on his public statement on Venezuela, saying yesterday he will not rule out the possibility of sending U.S. troops into Venezuela as the buildup continues, as we've covered on this show. Also, the CDC has linked a measles outbreak in multiple states for the first time. So, happy winter, folks. We've got measles outbreaks happening. After a first case in Texas, the U.S. is on the verge of losing what is known as elimination status, as determined by the World Health Organization. In other news, President Bush was on Monday Night Football last night with Eli and Peyton Manning, reminding us of just how radical Trump is. George Bush offered a very reasonable and polite alternative. Meanwhile, speaking of sports, at the White House, Trump is expected to welcome Cristiano Ronaldo, the soccer player, along with Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman at the Oval Office. And maybe some enlightening and happy news. Division III Scranton University women's basketball team beat Division I Pitt last night, Pittsburgh, 69-63, reminding you that the underdog can still win and anything is possible, not just in sports, but in America. It's a busy week. Tuesday is at the center of it. We're going to dive into it with Tom Bowman coming up. And now is most definitely a time to stay vigilant. All right, and helping us stay vigilant, a guy I have known for many, many years now. I think back to the days when I first came back from Iraq. He is the NPR's Pentagon reporter. He was a Baltimore Sun reporter for over 19 years prior to that. He's won a lot of awards. The 2006 Headliners Award for his coverage on the lack of advanced tourniquets for U.S. troops in Iraq. In 2010, he got the Edward R. Murrow Award for his coverage of a Taliban roadside bomb attack on an army unit. And back in 2024, he got the Murrow Award for his investigative reporting in his podcast, Taking Cover, which I highly recommend, investigating a Marine friendly fire incident in Fallujah. He knows the Pentagon. He knows the media. He knows America. And I think he's a very important conscience and voice of reason, especially in times like this. And joining us now, the great and powerful Tom Bowman is here, back on Independent Americans. Welcome back, sir.
Paul, great to be with you. This is 376. Man, great work.
Whew. I mean, we're putting up points like your New England Patriots, huh? You got to be happy about that.
Almost as good. You're getting there. You're getting there.
I mean, you're a big football fan. I got to have you back for Football Friday, but how fun is football right now?
Really fun. And I'd like to mention my son, Liam. He went to Oregon, and they're doing quite well, too.
You mentioned that when you were on the show last year because I told you my 6-year-old's favorite team is Oregon.
He's going to go there, man. Go to Eugene. It's a great place.
My listeners know that I went to see them at Rutgers a couple weeks ago. And we've got more Oregon gear than probably any 6-year-old should be allowed. But
that's great news.
What a fun program that is, right?
It's a great program.
And your son is also apparently kicking ass and following in your footsteps and into the journalism world and doing really well himself, right?
Yeah, as a proud dad, I like to say my son had a front page story in the Washington Post today about a halfway house that has not been built, even though millions of dollars are heading their way. And yeah, great job on my son, Liam. Really proud.
That's awesome. I mean, that's a heck of a start. People always say, your kids are like you. I say they're new and improved. And he's drafting off of you. He's got a great role model. I always ask this of all the parents that are on. Your son's doing very well. He went to Oregon. He's got a front page story in the Washington Post. Any tips for parents or any techniques or strategies that you had as a parent with Liam that helped set him up for success that you would want to recommend with others?
I would just, find out what their passions are and really encourage them and help them along that way. And, I was a history major in college, and friends' parents would say, "What are you going to do with a history degree?" I use it every single day in my job as a reporter, you know.
No, that's awesome, man. And you might have a situation where the Patriots and Oregon are playing for a championship pretty soon. So it'll be a fun time in the Bowman
I
house.
think it's going to happen.
Well, let me ask you, Tom. Like you were with us about a year ago now. A lot has changed, a lot to dig into, but especially in a moment like this, where are you in America, and how are you?
I'm doing fine. Still working at NPR, still covering the Pentagon, even though they kicked us out of the Pentagon. But, we have to do workarounds. There was a Marine officer in the Pentagon, and he was talking to another reporter, kind of complaining about it. And this guy basically said, listen, be a Marine, find workarounds, figure out how to do your job and overcome. And I agree with that 100%. So we'll reach out to people we know in the Pentagon, the retired community, Capitol Hill. I'm reaching out more, Paul, to embassies who were really helpful to us in finding out what's going on, particularly with Ukraine and also what's going on down in the Caribbean. So we're not going to be swayed. We're not going to roll up and die. We're just going to continue to do the work that we can, and we're getting great stories.
I want to dig into that more. Where actually are you? In Northern Virginia or DC?
Yeah,
And
Alexandria, just across the river from D.C.
how do you've been in DC for decades, you're now bringing up a new generation. Can you describe what's the atmosphere like in Arlington, in the Capitol, in DC versus other administrations, other times in history?
Well, with all the cutbacks in federal workers and with some of the policies we're seeing now, this people are really distressed by it. A lot of people in my neighborhood have lost jobs with these government cutbacks. A lot of people in my neighborhood in the military, they're worried about the way ahead. They're worried about National Guard on the streets of Washington and other cities as well. This is not what the Guard is supposed to be doing. You
Mhm.
know, these protests can be handled by police. And that's not being done. And we're seeing, challenges in the courts to having some of these guard troops on the streets. It's just not necessary. So I think there's a sense of, depression, anxiety about the way ahead. It's just not a good feeling. I've never seen anything like this really in more than 3 decades in DC.
I think it's important for folks to understand because I think there are swaths of America, especially coming out of the shutdown, where you might not have felt it, right? Maybe upper middle class folks in certain neighborhoods, if you don't have a lot of government workers, if you don't have a lot of military folks, but in an area like yours where everybody is connected to politics or government in some way, whether they're CIA or they work at the Pentagon or they're a journalist or they're a diplomat, the entire culture of your community is interwoven into the government. And when you have something as radical as a government shutdown, it just hits everybody, from the little league games to the dinner tables, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And again, people obviously who lost their jobs, people I know who work for USAID, people in the State Department that are worried about the way ahead. It's just has a corrosive effect on neighborhoods like mine. And I think now across the country, people are starting to feel it with the tariffs and what impact that's going to have on the economy, and also the question of Obamacare. Will you get subsidies? Will you lose those subsidies? That's going to toss a lot of people off their health care. And when they get sick, they're going to go to the hospital. They're going to go to the emergency room, which is more expensive care. So you're going to see a number of hospitals close if they can't get these subsidies. And then the overall issue is, okay, $250 billion to help people buy insurance. Is that a good way ahead, or can you use that money more responsibly, lowering the cost of healthcare? People have been talking about that for many years, but you don't see a plan really from either Democrats or Republicans about how do you lower the cost of healthcare, right? I mean, that's really the main issue. And you just don't, they're using, Obamacare, I think both sides as a bludgeon, but they have to find a better way to reduce the cost. And I just don't see that happening.
I think there's a lot that we don't see happening that needs to happen. And I'm excited to dig into all of it with you because you are very wise, you are very experienced, you're also tremendously respected in the journalism community, in the government community, in the military. And in anticipation of this conversation, I was really trying to think about the breaking news, where we are today on Tuesday, and what's coming up, and how to approach this with you. And I think I've figured a way to pull it all together in what I think is right now today's top topic. Tom, we've covered Venezuela, we've covered Trump's march across the Pentagon. And, I really think the biggest story in the world in America is still that Trump can do anything he wants with the most powerful military in the world, and nobody can stop him. But I think the story within the story is that from the moment he got elected, Trump waged war on the press. And I think he's winning. And that's what I want to kind of pull apart with you and get your perspective. But he's created a propaganda machine, and I think it's growing, and I think it's working. And he's put the pieces in place for bold and radical actions like Venezuela or like the Insurrection Act. He removed the Pentagon Press Corps, which you wrote a great piece about and you've been outspoken about. I want to talk to you about that. He replaced folks like you and Dan Lamothe with Laura Loomer and the My Pillow TV guy. He defunded NPR and PBS. And today on Air Force One, I'm not sure if Chris can play this clip.
Bill Clinton, with respect to the head of Harvard, with respect to all of those people that he knew, including J.P. Morgan checks.
Sir,
Yeah,
is
Jennifer,
there
go
something
ahead.
incriminating in the file, sir?
But a female Bloomberg reporter asked him if there's nothing indiscriminately in the Epstein files, why not? And he interrupted her and said, quiet, quiet, piggy. He called her piggy. And I think, in normal times, this is like the most disgusting and dishonorable behavior that might bring down a president. But this is not normal times. And I think Trump is so emboldened and unaccountable that he talks to people like this daily. And I also think he's so emboldened and unaccountable that he's willing to release the Epstein files. I think he made a calculation that this is going to happen sooner or later, and he can take it on. I think he thinks he can spin out of it no matter what comes out of there because he has, I think, effectively waged this war on the press. And I think it shows a consistent, threatening, and dangerous hostility toward the press specifically, right? And he's encouraged his followers and even the troops to adopt that kind of aggressive, marginally violent language. And I think the world is watching, our kids are watching, and it doesn't seem like Congress or anybody in his circles has any honor or is going to do anything. So I think it's unacceptable in America, and it brings shame on all of us as a nation. I'm going to speak out about it, but I want to ask you, Tom, because you know this. You've worked in the Pentagon, you continue to cover it, but I think Trump has waged war on the press and on the media, and I think he's winning. What do you think?
I really don't think he's winning because we're all still doing our stories. We're all still covering our beats. The New York Times, Washington Post, in particular, doing some really, really good work. What's unfortunate is, when they kicked us out of the Pentagon, no one's telling the military story. You can't tell the military story, as you know well, Paul, by little tweets or by little videos or by Hegseth doing push-ups with the troops. That's not helping anybody. It's not helping them. It's not helping the American people. Here's the thing. With the military in particular, the American people have a right to know what's being done in their name, with their money, and more importantly, and you know this better than anyone, where are you sending their sons and daughters? Are you sending them into harm's way? Why are you doing this? There have only been 2 briefings, press briefings at the Pentagon now in 11 months. The first one was done by Hegseth, and I'm glad he came out with the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. The second briefing, and I'm glad he pointed to me and took my questions, but it was largely a harangue against the press. So again, it's not helping anybody. It's not helping the administration or the American people. So the military story is not being told. And a number of years ago, before the Iraq War, we were down at Fort Benning And we listened to Hal Moore. He was there talking with us. And Hal Moore, of course, is the famous general in one of the early battles of the Vietnam War. And he told me something I never forget. He said, every place I went in Vietnam, I took the press with me because the American people have a right to know what their sons are doing in their name. I never forgot that. And I think he was absolutely right in what he was saying.
I want to stay on this because you wrote a piece for NPR, why I'm handing in my Pentagon press pass. And we've had Dan Lamothe on this show. I had Kevin Barron on. I've had Barbara Starr. In the past, we've had folks like Bob Woodruff and Martha Raddatz. I really have tried to bring a focus on the important, what I think is patriotic duty that you all perform. And it's maybe most clear around the Pentagon because it's where, we send our young men and women to fight and die. But can you just expand upon, for you personally, the title was Why I'm Handing in My Pentagon Press Pass. Can you explain why you did that?
Well, the Pentagon came up with this new policy, basically said you can't solicit information from anybody within the Pentagon. You can't reach behind what's going on behind the scenes. You can't call people. You basically have to wait for the Pentagon to release information, and then you're supposed to, print that or report on it. That's not reporting. That's called stenography. And you'll love this, Paul. I was at a reception for Romanian Armed Forces Day, and I was with my wife and walk into the sea of military attaches, people from Uganda, people from Canada, Japan, and Latvia, Lithuania. And this guy walks up and introduces himself. He's a Chinese military attache. And we start talking. This is his second tour here, perfect English. We talked about where he's been. He said, I was in the Boston area. I love Boston. I said, so we were joking about that. I said, I'm from Boston. You must be a really good guy. And then he said, let me ask you about this new Pentagon press policy. What can you tell me about it? And I explained it, just like I said. So we can't solicit information. We can't go behind the scenes to try to find out what's going on. We have to wait until they give us something spoon-fed to us, and then we can print it. And he said, oh, just like us. How sad is that?
I think that's a really important clarifier. I mean, this is not how we do things in America. This is how they do it in China. This is how they do it in North Korea. And the reason why I wonder if he's winning is because he has consolidated his messaging and supercharged his content production machine to the point where he is reaching more and more people by the day, right? Like he's getting deeper into his base. Last week he was on the Pat McAfee show. He's on the NFL. I think they're being really smart. And he's got Cristiano Ronaldo at the White House today, right? He's kind of owning the culture. And I think he's okay to frankly lose NPR because he thinks he's going to get Fox Sports, right? And I think there's been a concerted strategy that's been led by Hegseth. Last night I think he posted a video talking about how they're going back to basics and basic training. Drill sergeants are going to be allowed to touch people again, which means they can hit them or manhandle them. They're going to be allowed to curse, right? They're going to be able to do it. And I said, great. They're also not going to drink water or wear sneakers anymore. It's like this knuckle dragging reversion to the way the Russians train their troops, and a lot of them die in training, right? There's just this hyper masculinity, but even more important, I think they've been very effective in pushing their content and avoiding all of you. And I worry that their base and their audience is growing, and yours might be shrinking. It's still important. It's still obviously intrepid, but I worry that they're playing a long game, which is to build that Chinese propaganda machine and ignore you all more and more.
I don't know. I think that's their attempt, of course, but I still believe that we are pretty strong out there. NPR is, the Post, the Times, these other organizations. And I think it is breaking through in some respects. If you look at what people are questioning now about Venezuela operations, is it legal? Again, getting back to the Obamacare and subsidies. And also, if people lose their health care, what does that mean for my rural hospital? So I think even though they're trying to spin things here and there, as administrations always do, I think a lot of people are listening to what we're reporting and others are reporting. Our donations have gone up quite a bit, by the way. People are still supporting us. We have 33 million or more listeners. So we're still strong, and the other bona fide news organizations are strong. So I'm not too worried. And I think the American people are starting to look at this and raising questions, troubling questions about what they're seeing.
Tom, I always try to cover not just what's happening, but what's happening next, right? And we've seen him weaponize the Justice Department to come after people like Comey and Tish James, and maybe it could be Clapper, it could be Milley. I feel like they have so far waited to come after somebody in the press, but the language continues to escalate. The threatening nature of it, how he's openly talking to the troops and getting them to boo the press. I feel like he's waiting to make an example of someone in the press, while simultaneously there's massive change at, for example, CBS, right? Bari Weiss is there, which impacts 60 Minutes. You've had so much tumult at CBS and at the Washington Post and other places. Um, as someone who's on the front lines, as someone who asks Hegseth hard questions, are there conversations between you and your colleagues about how and if they could come after you personally? And it seems like he views you all as fair game, and that
I
would
don't.
only be a matter of time.
I haven't heard anything about coming after us personally or arresting us for whatever reason. I haven't heard anything about that. I suppose they could, if somebody gets classified information, they could prosecute them. But I haven't heard anything along those lines. It's more of a sense of we're just kind of, we're kind of sad and distressed that we can't go into the Pentagon like we used to in the past. And a lot of times, Paul, it's not, it would help everybody because a lot of times we'd be working on a story. We go up to someone in the Pentagon, let's say a 3 or a 4-star, you run into in the hallway and say, hey, I'm working on the story, General. I think it's heading this way. And many times in the past, they would say, no, Tom, you have it half right. It's actually heading in the other direction, right?
Mm.
So it helps the military that we get the story right. It helps them to basically, direct us if we're making a mistake. I was talking to one guy in the Pentagon. He said his concern now is if somebody gets a story wrong and others echo that story, he's going to have a hard time getting in front of that mistake and stopping it, right? So misinformation could be getting out there about what exactly is going on and why. Again, as I keep saying, this is not helping anybody. It's not helping us, not helping the administration, and it's certainly not helping the American people.
Well, it is helping Trump if he wants to continue to go with the pedal to the metal and not slow down for any guardrails or norms, right? I mean, I feel like he's blowing through them over and over again. And I remind people that he hit Iran, and really there was no accountability, and they kind of distorted the truth. They argued over the truth. Not only is he at war with the media, he's at war with the truth. And he's got his version of what happened in Iran. The reporting said something else. And I guess this leads us to Venezuela. And now we've got ships, crescendoing in the Caribbean. Now it seems like maybe around February 24th, if they're able to categorize Maduro's organization as a terrorist organization, they have at least some kind of legal justification. You've been in this space for a long time, Tom. What are you hearing? And I know you're probably reluctant to make predictions, but if you had to put money on it here, what do you think is going to happen? Do you think he'll strike Venezuela? Do you think he'll put boots on the ground? How far do you think he'll go with Venezuela, if at all?
It's hard to say. I talk to people in the Pentagon and elsewhere who their sense is the table has been set, but set for what? Is it to go after the cartels on the ground in Venezuela, maybe taking out their labs or airstrips for their aircraft? Or is it to go after the government itself? So we don't have a sense of where this is going, but the sense is they will likely move against, the Maduro government. That's kind of sense we get. Now, Trump just said on Sunday that Maduro has reached out. He wants to talk. Now, what does that mean? Does it mean I'm going to leave office, I'll step down, I'll go into exile? Is he looking for some sort of a compromise? We don't know exactly what that means. So I think we're all in kind of a holding pattern at this point. They're continuing to strike those drug boats. I think they're up to 21 now and more than 80 dead. Of course, the Gerald Ford, the carrier, is now in the northern Caribbean. So I'm told nothing is likely to happen in the coming days. But because you still have these ongoing meetings, options are being offered to the White House. They're going to reach out, they say, to the Hill if they strike Venezuela itself. But I think there's a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of uncertainty about the way ahead. And I think we don't have a sense, maybe no one has a sense yet of where this thing is going. What I'm also hearing is that Trump may say to Maduro, you have 48 hours to leave. And the U.S. did the same thing with someone called Saddam Hussein
Yep.
back in 2003. Obviously he did not leave, and as a result, the Americans invaded. I would doubt if you're going to see boots on the ground, then you're heading into a real hornet's nest if you do that. Venezuela's a big country, a lot of people, and I just can't imagine anybody would think that would be a good idea. So if it happens, you're likely to see more strikes, right? Tomahawk missiles or airstrikes on Venezuela. But again, what are the targets? Is it cartel? Is it Maduro's government? Again, I think everyone is just trying to figure out the way ahead. And I don't think we're there yet.
Well, and it feels like Maduro's learned from Putin. And what Putin does is every time Trump threatens, Putin says, "Oh, let's go to the table and talk." Right? I mean, you feel like you can get, Trump to negotiate. You can talk Trump down. That Taco, right? Trump is always folding. I mean, it feels like one of those situations where Maduro has looked at Putin's attack and strategy and said, you know what, maybe I should take a page from him. But at the same
Right.
time, for so much talk about not wanting regime change wars, especially for people like Tulsi Gabbard, I've said that these boat strikes are like the WMDs for Venezuela in 2025. It feels like the entry point to do much more, and they're using it as a justification. So I don't know if the American public fully understands. Your line is great. The table is set. I think that's right. The table is set, and now it's a matter of which dish they want to serve, right?
Right. And here's another thing to note, Paul, that President Trump has announced a covert CIA operation against Venezuela. When you announce a covert CIA operation, it's called overt. So what is all that about? Now, if you look back in history, when the CIA goes in quietly in a real covert operation, they work behind the scenes. They look who can come in behind the person they want to take out. You saw that in Iran in the 50s. You saw it in the Congo in the 50s. They tried to do it in Cuba. That didn't work out well. In Vietnam, too, they would select certain generals here or there, what you want to take over now. So it's possible that that's what's going on now in Venezuela, that if the CIA is on the ground there, they could be reaching out to people within the Venezuelan military, maybe former officers in the Venezuelan military. Clearly, they're in touch with Maria Machado, the Nobel laureate, who could step into the breach should the Venezuelan leader Maduro leave. So I think that's kind of where we are too. It's important to note that that's going on behind the scenes. So what exactly is that looking like? Can they find someone, especially within the military? Because if you're going to do regime change, where does the military stand? That's going to be key here.
Just in time for Thanksgiving and the holidays. Tom, I want to build on this and go to our next segment that we call Below the Radar, where, I think this folds into our conversation, and having you here, I really wanted to touch on it. Congress cut over $1 billion in federal funding for public broadcasting that impacted PBS and NPR. They pulled back funds from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. There have been cuts at the station level, layoffs, huge financial strain on a lot of public media organizations. But I think despite these attacks, NPR and PBS are still kicking ass. I mean, PBS has got this amazing moment happening with The American Revolution by Ken Burns, I think reminds everybody why PBS is so important. And NPR has reporters like you, right, that continue to bang away, and so much other investigative reporting, analysis, local reporting. Can you take us, into the trenches here, into the NPR side here, where I think your reporting has been among the best in the world. I think it's really important, especially around national security. I think folks may underestimate how critical NPR has been around Iraq and Afghanistan for the last 20 years. You've won many awards, but can you take us inside the fight here? They've cut your funding. They put a bullseye on you. They keep coming at you, but you guys are hunkered down and banging away.
No, absolutely. It's unfortunate that we lost that funding. Again, our donations are up, which is really good, but the concern is, can you maintain that in the coming years? We have seen some layoffs at smaller stations. I was just up in Vermont at the NPR station up there, and they had to have a couple of layoffs. So the smaller stations that don't have the listeners, the volume of listeners, they're going to be suffering a bit because they can't get those donations. So we're going to see some maybe consolidate, maybe some close, unfortunately. But you're absolutely right about the value of NPR. In a lot of these places, you look at rural Alaska or northern Maine or Vermont, a lot of times this is the only news they can get. And my wife's family's from Wyoming, and they're pretty conservative Catholics, right? Good friends of ours and all. They listen to NPR because there's nothing else out there as they're driving up into the Bighorn Mountains to their ranches, right? They listen to NPR. So I think you're going to lose something really valuable in this country if a number of these stations start to close. It. You're absolutely right about PBS and the Ken Burns American Revolution series. I started watching it last night. It is stellar. It is really, really well done. But you're right. We're still doing strong reporting. My colleague Ryan Lucas just had a great story yesterday on NPR about the attacks on the drug boats. The administration was talking about this many months ago, right? Maybe 5 or 6 months ago, that they wanted not to interdict these boats, as the Coast Guard would often do, but actually to blow them up. So again, strong reporting from NPR. Please support your local NPR station because they bring you really good local news too that you're not going to get anywhere else. But we'll forge ahead.
I want to echo that. I joined Brian Lair on WNYC last week here in New York on New York's NPR, just because every year he does a conversation on Veterans Day. It's like a public town hall. And that's just one example. We're going to have Senator John Tester, former senator from Montana, will be on tomorrow. We'll talk about how this impacts rural areas like Montana. Tom, before we shift into our Something Good segment, let me ask you, this is Below the Radar. What's the story that's below the radar? What do you feel like you're covering or NPR's covering that most Americans aren't paying attention to that might be big in the days to come or is important right now, especially around national security or anything happening?
Well, I think the big thing we've reported on a lot, but it's still kind of in limbo in the courts, sending National Guard troops out to Americans' cities. The Supreme Court's looking at the Chicago case with regard to that. We'll see what happens with their views on that. I know in Memphis, a court has also stopped the Guard from going into the streets of Memphis. I think that's something we're going to keep an eye on. And again, as people have said in the past, defense secretaries, you know, usually police can handle some of these protests. It doesn't have to rise to the level of the National Guard on these streets. The protests in Portland and Chicago, some of them pretty loud, but never rising to the level of requiring the National Guard to go in. And I know with what President Trump and Defense Secretary Hegseth said at Quantico, a number of weeks ago, that the American streets can be basically training grounds for the military. That disturbed a lot of military people I spoke with. They found that abhorrent, that the U.S. cities, the streets of American cities, would be a training ground for the American military.
Mm-hmm. I think that's an important one. I'm going to stay on it. We've stayed on it on this show, and I want to point to two potential flashpoints. Seattle has now elected an openly socialist mayor that is young, that is viewed as inexperienced, but won a very close election. She's been called kind of Seattle's version of Mamdani, but I would look to Seattle as a place where Trump's going to increase the rhetoric, but also back in New York. Once Mamdani gets sworn in, I've long warned that he could come to a loggerhead with the NYPD. And if there's any kind of a labor dispute with the NYPD, any kind of walkout, I think Trump could use that as a justification to send in the National Guard. And I think he's looking for this fight, and he may be pausing in places like Portland that look more murky so that he can focus on something that might be more clear, like Mamdani. So I'm going to point to that and keep focusing points to that. I think he's looking for a flashpoint, and he might create one in a place like New York or Seattle in the days to come. Do you have any insight into those areas in particular, Tom? Is there any special concern in the Pentagon or other places about New York as an example? Because given the pushback on ICE, the complexity, the density of the population, I mean, if I'm a National Guardsman, it's probably the last place I'd want to go. But is there any thoughts or intel that you've got from what you're hearing inside the Pentagon about that?
I even more just not New York in particular, but just general concern about putting the Guard on American streets. And I'll also mention that the Illinois Guard on their Facebook page, this is a number of weeks ago, I was told, that they're getting messages like, you're traitors, you're Nazis, you're SS. And this is even before any guardsman has even stepped 1 foot on the streets of Chicago. So there's a concern, I think, within the Guard about how we're going to be viewed if we go out with ICE and we're helping ICE with some of these arrests. And look at the videos we've seen. Some of these arrests have been quite brutal. So I think the concern is that they may be tainted if they're in ICE operations that get very, very brutal, that they're going to be tagged and again tainted as part of a problem as opposed to helping Americans. So you look at the National Guard, as you know, what do? They fill sandbags, they carry, people across flooded streets, right there, your neighbors and so forth. And so I think there's a real concern there that it could not be good for the Guard going forward.
I think that's so important because, the military is kind of one of the last institutions that still has respect and overwhelming support in this country. And I think Trump knows that and has very, very shrewdly manipulated it. But what we've seen is our popularity is dropping too. And when folks view us, whether it's fair or not, as Hegseth's military or backing up ICE, I think we could see the popularity of our military drop in a way we haven't seen since after Vietnam. We worked for decades to rebuild the trust and the respect in our military, and I think we turned a tremendous corner. But I think this has the danger of pulling us very far back, and I think that's part of why he has sent National Guards from one state to another, because it's a lot different when they're actually from your community and you've got to go back to your neighborhood. But if you're from another state, it makes it a lot easier to do that. So I want to keep everybody's attention on this if it unfolds. Tom, I hope you'll come back for that. Let's shift gears. That's something bad but important. Let's shift into something that we always end the show with, and that's something good.
Something good, oh, something sweet. Feel the fire.
Tom, I want to pull out something good that folks may have missed over the weekend. And it's that Ukraine's soccer team defeated Iceland 2-0 in their final group stage match. They got second place in their group, and they're going on to the playoffs. So now with this victory, they're second in their qualifying group, and they have a chance still at getting into the 2026 World Cup. So Ukraine's in the playoffs. I think most of the world is rooting for them, and I think it's a damn good thing, not just for sports, but for awareness around the fight in Ukraine that continues to go on. I don't think there's a bigger stage in the world than the World Cup. And if Ukraine can make that stage, every match will be an opportunity to raise visibility and support for Ukraine against Putin. I think it's really exciting. Ukraine needs some hope, and I think it's something good. Tom, over to you. You're a huge sports fan. I don't know if you're going to go in that direction, but you're a man of many talents and interests. What do you got that's something good?
I got to say the UN vote on the Gaza peace plan that came from the Trump administration, I think is really positive. Now, can they put that into effect? Will Hamas give up its arms? Can they rebuild Gaza? But it's a really important, we've been criticizing the Trump administration for the press policy and what they've been doing, but that is really positive after, all this time, so many deaths in Gaza. And the horrific thing that happened on October 7th, 2 years ago in Israel, maybe finally this is on a path to something better. I think that's really important to note.
Hear, hear. I'm going to echo that. Your Patriots also not a bad thing. What do you think? They're going to go all the way? Can they get past?
I think they're going to go all the way. It's been too long since we haven't had a Super Bowl win. It's been
the Bills
years?
don't look like the Bills of old, right? I mean, Miami's a non-factor. The Jets are a non-factor. Right. The Chiefs look like they're not the Chiefs of old. I mean, it kind of feels like there's this open lane. If Drake May can keep going, I mean, it shows what a really great quarterback can do.
I think he looks damn good. And also, let's not forget the Oregon Ducks. My son is a Duck, and they're doing quite well. Also.
They are, and I'll probably come back to this, but they always have an exciting uniform reveal. Something else good this week is Army's uniform reveal. I don't know if you saw it, Tom. It was amazing for the Army-Navy game. And Navy's is coming today, so look out for that. We'll come back to it. But the Army-Navy game is going to be exciting, too.
Great.
All right, my friend Tom Bowman, I can't thank you enough for joining us, man. You're an intrepid voice. You're a patriot. You're courageous. You've been doing this for so long, and you are so well respected and revered, especially in the Pentagon and in the military and veterans community. So I want to thank you for all your leadership and for your example. And it's no surprise to me that your son is following in your footsteps and doing great. But thank you for all you do, sir, and for joining me on the show today.
Thanks, Paul. Really appreciate it, and keep going. Go beyond 376. Let's get up to 400.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. Follow Tom on social media. Listen for him on NPR all the time. And as Tom mentioned, we are now daily. This show is daily. So if you don't already, please follow us on every social media platform. Subscribe right now. Hit that subscribe button. I think we're up like 300% on YouTube in the last couple of weeks. You can get Independent Americans merch, and you can chip in a few bucks on our Patreon community to help keep this content coming. We're going to keep that focus on national security and veterans issues and foreign policy, but also culture, sports, leadership, parenting, all the rest of it. And we got a big week ahead. Tomorrow, we've got former Montana Senator John Tester. Thursday, Nolan Peterson, my really, really smart and thoughtful friend, the co-founder of American Veterans for Ukraine. He's a writer, he's an activist, he's a journalist, always tied into what's happening in Ukraine. And then Friday, Admiral Bill McCraven will be here. If you don't know, he's a retired four-star admiral. He was the commander of SOCOM, the chancellor of the Texas school system, and the best-selling author who talked about making your bed. And maybe a viable independent veteran candidate for president one day. So he's coming up. But America might be divided. But more than ever, we at Independent Americans are trying to change that, bring light to contrast the heat, hold people accountable, and put country over party, people over politics, light over heat. And our movement is growing. If you enjoyed this episode with Tom Bowman, please share it far and wide. Help other folks declare their independence. And stay vigilant, my friends, especially now, because eternal vigilance is the price of freedom. It's a price that Tom Bowman has been paying for decades on behalf of all of us. And hope is the oxygen of democracy. No, you're not alone in your vigilance. We're all vigilant, and we're all in this together. I'll see you tomorrow for the next installment. Until then, I'm Paul Rieckhoff from New York City. Stay vigilant, America.
Powered by Righteous Media.